You know what? The moment somebody starts emotionally detaching, people immediately assume the worst. They assume that you've become cold. They assume that you become bitter. They assume you've become arrogant. They assume that you've stopped caring. They assume that you've changed. And in a way, they're right. You did change, but not in the way that they think. Because emotional detachment is not about caring less. It's about suffering less. And nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the power that comes from learning how to separate your peace from other people's behavior. Nobody talks about the freedom that comes from no longer being emotionally controlled by everything happening around you. Nobody talks about what happens when you stop allowing every text message, every opinion, every rejection, every disappointment, every criticism, every setback to dictate your emotional state. Because most people live reactively. Something good happens, they're up. Something bad happens, they're down. Someone compliments them, they're happy. Someone criticizes them, they're devastated. Someone chooses them, they're confident. Someone rejects them, they question their worth. You see, they're constantly being moved by the external, constantly. And that's exhausting. That's why so many people are mentally drained. That's why so many people are emotionally exhausted. That's why so many people feel like they're carrying the weight of the world because they've never learned emotional detachment. They've never learned how to remain connected without becoming attached. And there is a difference, a huge difference. See, healthy people are connected. Unhealthy people are attached. Healthy people love. Attached people cling. Healthy people care. Attached people depend. Healthy people appreciate. Attached people need. And that's where suffering begins. Because the moment your happiness becomes dependent on something outside of you, you've handed away all of your power. You see, the moment your peace becomes dependent on somebody else's behavior, you've handed away your power. The moment your confidence becomes dependent on validation, you've handed away your power. And people do this every single day without even realizing it. They become attached to outcomes, attached to expectations, attached to relationships, attached to being understood, attached to being chosen, attached to being liked, attached to being accepted, attached to being right. And every attachment becomes a potential source of suffering because life doesn't always cooperate. People don't always behave the way that you want. Relationships don't always work. Plans don't always unfold perfectly. People disappoint you. Situations change. Circumstances shift. And if you're emotionally attached to all of it, life will throw you around like a rag doll. 1 minute you're happy. The next minute you're broken. 1 minute you're confident. The next minute you're questioning everything. 1 minute you're at peace. The next minute you're anxious. And that's not power. That's dependency. Real power looks different. Real power is being able to care deeply without losing yourself. Real power is being able to love people without making them responsible for your happiness. Real power is being able to pursue goals without attaching your identity to the outcome. Real power is being able to walk through life with open hands instead of clenched fists. That's emotional detachment. And most people misunderstand it completely. They think detachment means you stop loving. No. Detachment allows you to love better because now your love isn't rooted in fear. Your love isn't rooted in control. Your love isn't rooted in possession. Your love isn't rooted in dependency. Your love becomes free, healthy, grounded, mature. That's why emotionally detached people often appear powerful. And it's not because they're emotionless. They're actually deeply emotional. They simply aren't controlled by their emotions. Big difference. Anyone can react. Anyone can explode. Anyone can panic. Anyone can spiral. Anyone can lose control. But remaining calm, remaining grounded, remaining centered, remaining objective, that's a skill. That's maturity. That's emotional intelligence. Think about the people who have the most influence in life, the people who make the best decisions, the people who lead effectively, the people who create successful businesses, the people who navigate relationships well, the people who bounce back from adversity. What do they all have in common? They don't allow temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. They pause, they think, they evaluate, they observe. And because they do, they avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering. Now let's talk about something that most people don't want to hear. A lot of emotional pain comes from attachment. Not the event itself, the attachment. Listen what I'm saying. A lot of emotional pain comes from the attachment, not the event or the thing that happened itself, the attachment. You're attached to how someone should behave. You're attached to how your life should look. You're attached to how quickly success should arrive. You're attached to how people should treat you. You're attached to what you expected. And when reality doesn't match the expectation, pain appears. Now hear me carefully. I'm not saying don't have desires. I'm not saying don't have goals. I'm not saying don't care. I'm saying hold things lightly. Hold them with wisdom. Hold them without allowing them to define you. Because life is constantly changing. And the people who adapt best are the people who detach best. They understand that everything is temporary. The good, the bad, the success, the struggle, the praise, the criticism, the wins, the losses. It's all temporary. And when you truly understand that, you stop overreacting to temporary things. You stop panicking. You stop catastrophizing. You stop making mountains out of molehills because you understand something deeply. This too shall pass. That's emotional detachment. It's the ability to zoom out, to see the bigger picture, to remember that this moment isn't your entire life. And that perspective changes everything because suddenly a rejection isn't the end of the world. A setback isn't the end of the world. A failed relationship isn't the end of the world. A difficult season isn't the end of the world. It's a chapter. It's not the whole story. And emotionally detached people understand that. That's why they're often able to smile through things that other people would collapse under. That's why they're often able to remain calm during chaos. That's why they're often able to keep moving forward when everybody else is giving up. It's not because life is easier for them. It's because they have perspective. They understand that emotions are visitors, not permanent residents. Let that sink in. Emotions are visitors, not permanent residents. Anger visits, fear visits, sadness visits, disappointments visits, frustrations visits, anxiety visits, but they don't stay forever unless you build them a house, unless you feed them, unless you identify them, unless you make them your identity. You see, emotionally detached people feel their emotions. They acknowledge them. They respect them, but they don't become them. That's the difference. They can say, I'm angry without becoming anger. I'm hurt without becoming hurt. I'm disappointed without becoming disappointment. They understand emotions are information, not instructions. And that's a game-changing mindset because so many people treat emotions like commands. I'm angry, so I should react. I'm hurt, so I should lash out. I'm disappointed, so I should quit. I'm scared, so I should stop. No, emotions provide information, but wisdom decides what happens next. And the more emotionally detached you become, the more power you gain over your own life. Because now you're responding instead of reacting. Now you're choosing instead of impulsively acting. Now you're creating instead of merely surviving. Now you're living intentionally. And that's what makes emotional detachment so powerful. It returns your power to you. Nobody can control your emotions. Nobody can manipulate your peace. Nobody can dictate your worth. Nobody can determine your value because all of those things come from you, from within, not from the outside world. And that's freedom. Real freedom, the kind of freedom that most people spend their entire lives searching for. The freedom to remain at peace regardless. The freedom to stay grounded regardless. The freedom to keep moving regardless. The freedom to love without losing yourself. The freedom to care without becoming consumed. The freedom to experience life without becoming enslaved by every emotion that passes through you. And if you're listening to me right now and you're in a season where life feels chaotic, maybe the lesson isn't to hold tighter. Maybe the lesson is to loosen your grip. Maybe the lesson is detachment. Maybe the lesson is learning to trust yourself. Maybe the lesson is learning to stop forcing. Maybe the lesson is learning to stop chasing. Maybe the lesson is learning to stop controlling things you were never meant to control. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go. Not because you've given up, because you've grown up. That's the difference. Anybody can hold on. It takes wisdom to know when to release. It takes strength to stop forcing. It takes maturity to stop chasing. It takes emotional intelligence to stop attaching your identity to everything happening around you. Nobody talks about the power of emotional detachment. But once you understand it, your entire life changes because now you're no longer controlled by external. You're led by the internal. And that is a different kind of power.